Welcome to the YoungMinds Parent Lounge session. We're covering bereavement today, and just before we start I would like to say please do look after yourself when you're listening to this session. There may be some quite emotive content. So today, as I said, we're tackling bereavement. I'm Emma Saddleton, I'm the helpline manager.
And I'm Chris Glenn, I'm one of the professional advisors at YoungMinds.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So we're going to kick-start this session today just by having a think about how grief manifests. Chris, would you like to start us off and just talk us through what your take is and what you hear from parents?
Well, I think what I hear from parents and mothers in particular, I think, is the thinking about other people and not thinking about themselves, not thinking that if they're able to carry on with the basics of day-to-day living, that they don't think their children will pick up on their general mood. And actually children are very sensitive to that, even though the food is on the table and they're being sent off to school every day and so on. So I think that's
definitely.
Definitely, yeah.
We often talk about children being like sponges. Children really soak up the anxieties of adults surrounded, that they're surrounded by. So that's something that definitely resonates. When we're working on the helpline, we often talk to parents about how you feel has a really, really tangible impact potentially on how a child might be feeling.
Yeah, and it's very hard, I think, to convince, I think mothers in particular, that's stereotyping, but that mothers actually are as important, the parent is as important as the ones that they're looking after.
Absolutely.
And that's very difficult, I think, for some parents and carers to hear. But actually, if they're functioning well, that will have an impact upon those around them.
And we often talk about parental resilience. So, we often talk to parents, don't we, about sort of what does self-care look like? What does resilience really, really mean? And when we're talking about children and grief, talk to us, Chris, about what you've heard as a professional advisor. We talk to parents of children of all different ages. I mean, some people talk about a grief cycle or different stages of grief. What would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's very interesting, because parts of the grief cycle may be about accepting that it's occurred, and then anger at a loss and so on and so forth, and then coming to terms with it and being able to integrate positive memories and also less positive memories as well. In actual fact, I think, though, that we can think that is the only way to go through grief. There are these cycles, and if you don't go through this, then there must be something wrong with you. Whereas I think it's a lot more nuanced. And so, for instance, when a parent or a child actually feels a sense of relief or release, or a bigger part of relief or release than of loss where they're missing someone.
Yes,
very complex.
And particularly if they've had a loved one or somebody close to them and they might have been really unwell for a long period. They might have seen lots of suffering, both from mum and dad, but also a grandparent that may have gone. And I think you're absolutely right. I think actually all of us as adults can probably recollect how we may have felt when we experienced a loss as a child. And it does feel as though it's quite a complex area for parents to get their head around. In your experience, do parents often want a solution? Is there a temptation for parents to really desperately want to make it better and to know what to do to make a child feel better?
Yeah, you see, again, I think one of the things about parenthood is that we seek to have, in a positive way, the maximum amount of control and influence on our loved ones' lives, on our children, our dependents' lives. And yet, one of the things about bereavement, a little bit like special needs or something like that, is that that's something out of our control.
Yes.
We don't know when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, even if somebody has a prognosis. And of course, many families are living with parents and others who are dying slowly in front of them. And yet, it's the uncertainty, I think, is something that could be very difficult for parents to manage, really.
It is. I often think that the unknown is worse than the known, and I think that's also true for children as much as it is for adults. So Chris, how much information should a parent give? If a parent is approaching an imminent loss, or there has been a loss, how much information would you recommend a parent should share with a child?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is not to try to make it better, that this is a reality for you and the young person, and that they will manage it in whatever way they want, but we can't wish it away. And so actually I think being matter of fact, but being concise and concrete and calm and clear about the message, I think is a useful way to think about it.
It feels quite emotionally stabilising what you've described, because I'm imagining if I'm a parent of a little one and I'm just giving some really calm, collected, nuanced, subtle bits of information where I'm helping them to make sense of, I'm helping to contextualise that actually you haven't caused this as well, because we've certainly heard on the helpline from parents of children who have felt that they've caused it. And I'm, you know, I think that all children are different, and children will experience death, loss and bereavement in quite an individual way. But certainly I've had calls from parents in the helpline who have said, my 5-year-old has had huge tantrums and said, I wish you were dead. Something's happened, and that child has internalised that. They've remembered those words, not just the words, but how they felt when they said it, and the anger and the frustration inside. And parents can be left feeling, my goodness, I know rationally that my child is not responsible for what's happened, but what can I do? What can I really do to alleviate a child's distress?
Yeah. And again, my approach would be, rather than to debate it away or use your superior logic, would be to say, yes, well, actually, many big 9-year-olds, for instance, think that. You know, you're not the only one who thinks that. And to accept it and to sit with it. And then to help the young person to move away from that. And
that feels really useful, actually. It feels really tangible and powerful to be able to just contextualise and say, what you said is quite normal, what you said is quite understandable, it's not abnormal. It's a really, really, really understandable reaction and emotion. So it kind of takes away the worry, as you're saying, without having to start with, you shouldn't have to worry about X because of Y. So that feels really, really tangible. So children can be quite impacted not just by loss of people but by pets as well. Have you found that as a clinician that supported parents at YoungMinds?
I think we shouldn't underestimate that at all, and actually if we talk to adults or hear adults' own narratives, we quite often hear that it's that their major loss was a pet from childhood that they've still never got over that loss of. So I think we shouldn't denigrate or ridicule young people's approaches to grief and what they choose to grieve over.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think sometimes the love that we as human beings get from animals can be quite unconditional. And actually I think often, you know, if a child loses a cat or a dog, often that's the relationship that's provided the most stability, a safe haven, and those can be particularly significant. So I think you're absolutely right. And I'm just wondering also, in your experience, when there is a loss in the family, can grief become quite cyclical within a family? Can one person's grief impact another person's grief? And are there any tips that we can provide to parents that might be really useful?
Well, I was just thinking, connected with something you said earlier on then about when we talk to our children, how do we do it? And I think sometimes parents can feel really guilty if they show emotion themselves, or if they cry, for instance. And I'd suggest that actually that's okay, it's quite normal, because what you're doing is showing to the young person, to your child, that it's okay to respond in that way. Excuse me. I think the problem or the difficulty could be when that becomes a pattern, and when it's happening every time and so on, in front of the child, and then the child can think, oh well, I'd better be brave and be big and be good and not show that I'm feeling like this, because look how fragile mummy or daddy is feeling. And that can be very difficult for children, and it's also connected with the trying to make it better. So the young person's trying to be good and a big young person at their age, whereas actually this is a time where everything falls apart in many ways and then comes together again.
And I think our big message is it's okay to fall apart. Death, bereavement and loss, these are very, very traumatic, deeply distressing, and I don't think there is fundamentally a right or wrong way for any individual parent or child to experience that loss and to grieve. There isn't really a formula to grieving, so although there may be some schools of thoughts about the different stages and the different cycles, actually everybody's individual and nobody has to adhere to a particular set and boundaried way of reacting to death and loss. Now, some parents often say to us, for example, a mum might say to us, my husband is dying of leukemia and I don't know how much information I should share with the children. I don't want to hide what's happening from them. I do want to prepare them. And we're often giving information in the context of the child's age, development. We're often looking at context. But is there anything that you would say to parents in that situation? How much information is the right information? And at what point does that become too much information, and why?
Well, one of the arts of parenthood, I think, is when to take the role of being parent to the child, and you have authority and so on, and when to have a more equal relationship, where it's a relationship between two human beings. And I think one of the useful ways to clarify that is to ask the young person and to say, first of all, I'd suggest to say, gosh, this is terrible, isn't it? It's awful for both of us and for the family. And we'd both be thinking, how are we going to live without Daddy, for instance, and so on. And then to ask, because I think so much of our work is moving between the practical and the emotional. And it's similarly true for young people, I think. Do they want some practical information?
Yes.
How much do they need to know to be supported in going through this
and
very
to make
difficult
sense
stage?
of? Yeah, absolutely. Is it important to have structure and routine when there is something as traumatic as loss happening within a family?
Well, again, I think that's something that we increasingly recognise, don't we, as being good for our psychological well-being generally.
Absolutely.
So whether it's sleep, eating, and so on, I would suggest that it is important, and that's often how we keep ourselves going, don't we? Whether it's we know we have the routine of going to work or going to school and so on, and that could keep us going. Whereas if we didn't, we would just be at home, and not having human contact.
Absolutely. And there's something really powerful, I think there's something really powerful about the parental ability to provide comfort. And I think it goes back to, Chris, earlier on you were saying that parents can't bring a solution. You can't fix it. If there is a loss and there is a death, a parent can't make it better, but you can provide comfort. The comfort won't remove the trauma, it won't remove the pain, but the comfort can make an enormous difference to a child's experience about how they feel that day, that week, that month and that year. Yeah. And I think, it's tough, isn't it? But we can't sort of underestimate the value and the importance of a hug, of a touch, of validating, of empathising and just saying, this is really difficult. This really hurts. I can see that you are in a huge amount of pain. And I think that that's valid. Yeah. And again, I think just the information can then help a young person to orientate themselves. And as you said, to know that it's okay to have ups and downs. Absolutely.
There'll be some good days, some less good days. And also important to think we all have that in life, but this can be more extreme. And so the ups and downs are much more greater and could be triggered by anything, can't they? So many of us have that experience of the person near to us who's died, and we've seen the back of their head in the street because they've got a similar build, similar colour hair and so on.
And you have that gut-wrenching moment of really sort of seeking after somebody, or you have a moment where a child may wake up first thing in the morning and have a moment of realisation. They remember that daddy's gone or mummy's gone or whoever it is, that person isn't in their life, and it can hit like a wall again.
And I was just thinking that another way of approaching it might be to say to the young person, are there things that you didn't say to daddy or to mummy or to grandparent that you'd like to say, or things that you really wish you'd have been able to say to them? Then if there are, would you like to write that down? Would you like to put it in a card? Or it's okay to have a conversation with them when you're in bed and talk to them about all the good things that have happened or all the things you wished could happen and things you didn't have to say. That's okay.
Absolutely. And I think that's so heartwarming and so important, because I think there is a question that parents often ask, which is, how do I keep a memory alive, a memory of a loved one that means so much to this child? How can I do it? And I think that's a lovely suggestion. And I would also say to anybody watching and viewing with us today, there are some really expert organisations, Cruise, Winston's Wish, Child Bereavement UK. These are the most fantastic organisations who are experts in understanding what tools can be used to support a parent in enabling a child to keep those memories alive, but in a really constructive way. And they will talk through things like memory boxes and, you know, those really, really specific tools and strategies. So Chris, in summary, is there, if you had to give 1 or 2 top tips to parents who are really supporting a child living with and coping with death and grief and loss, would there be 1 or 2 key things that you would want to say to parents?
I think it does depend on age, but I would certainly say important to explain that the death is not the young person's fault, and also to be able to just try to keep communication open. And it's, again, this is where the art, isn't it, of parenting, sometimes we get it more or less right and sometimes we don't. Do you fuss too much? Some children might not appreciate it being asked 2 or 3 times a day, how are they feeling? But you might agree as a parent, well, we're just going to check in with each other every Sunday to see how we're feeling and how the week has been. It needs to be tailored to what's right for the young person and also what the parent is able to manage. But I think we always need to remember as adults in these situations that we're the ones who are adults and we have control over our responses, and that's the only area that we actually do have some influence and control over, is what we do and how we react. And so again, having the equal communication with the young person rather than trying to make it better, I would say a good hints and tips, really.
Thank you. So equal communication there is our top tip from one of our experts here at Young Minds. I would end the session today by also saying, I think if anybody's listening to this, don't feel pressured to have the solution. You don't have to fix this. It's about learning how you all live with it, and you don't have to have a fix to it. Secondly, I would say act on warning signs. It is a difficult period, but you are your child's greatest expert, and you will know as a parent when warning signs are starting to emerge. So if a child appears really, really low in mood, really anxious for a prolonged period of time, if they don't appear to be functioning or coping, that's time to seek help.
And similarly for the parents as well.
Absolutely.
If they're not functioning or coping, that's time for them to seek help in their own right.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your support and your expert advice today, Chris. Thank you for everybody that's tuned in and listened to our December Parent Lounge session on bereavement. We will be touching on self-esteem in our January session. Thank you.